Hello everyone, and today we're going to be taking a look at the GTX 1070 in 2022. We're checking out a bit of Elden Ring here, but we're going to check out quite a few games from 2022. We should point out that the PC that we're using here is a Ryzen 7 3700X CPU. We've got 16 gigs of RAM. There's a dude here poking at me, trying to poke at me there. And he missed. I was trying to do Elden Gear Solid, but it didn't work out too well, and I've hit the wrong dude there. But anyway, yep, we've got a Ryzen 7 3700X, 8 cores and 16 threads, as you can see from the Riva Tuner statistics here. Running a Asus Strix OC GTX 1070, in case you're wondering here. Sitting at a nice 2000 megahertz clock speed there. That's pretty nice. That's a pretty well clocked CPU. So we're running 1080p and high settings in Elden Ring, and the performance is reasonable. Bear in mind, Elden Ring is capped at 60 FPS. It is mostly GPU bound, as you can see here. The GPU is in the 80s and the 90s usage. CPU usage, again, this is quite CPU heavy, so we've gone for well, it's not really a high-end CPU nowadays. It's more of a mid-range-ish CPU, 8 cores and 16 threads here. Sitting at 4.2 gigahertz, as you can see there. It's not a bad CPU to use. I did have the Ryzen 5 2600, so we're going to go through our usual Elden Ring thing where we aggro everybody here, and they all come after us, and the frame rate tends to dip here. But it's mostly CPU that causes the frame rate to dip. Especially when we're traversing the open world with a bunch of angry dudes. Got hit there by someone. This is the usual thing where we aggro a bunch of angry dudes and run away from them. We did this on the Steam Deck as well. But yeah, I tried to jump through that window but couldn't. There was a gap there for the window there, but you know, I tried and I couldn't get on the magical horsey. Where is everybody? Everybody's given up. And again, will be incompetent. But the dude that we're fighting is incompetent as well. See, we killed him there. Actually killed somebody, and the rest of them are just like, nah, screw it. I'm just going to let them go. They're on a magical horsey, so, you know, they're just giving up there and just ran away. But yeah, Elden Ring is okay. Traversing the open world can cause drops in the frame rate. Some of the bosses, they're pretty... I did the first boss in Elden Ring. I didn't really play it that much, to be honest with you. Elden Ring never really worked on my main gaming PC, so this is the character I use for, they use this character for testing, because I was about 10 hours into it, and then patch 1.03 came out, and then it refused to launch on the other PC that we had. That was with the i7 12700KF and the 3080 Ti. I will say this, make sure you've got 16 gigs of RAM for this, because it does use quite a lot of memory. It's using 11 gigs at the moment. So we've got 16 gigs, DDR4, 3200 megahertz in the system. It's always going to be the same. So this game doesn't have any resolution scaling options. There's no FSR. Bear in mind, on the 1070, we cannot use DLSS. We can use AMD's FSR though, because this is a pre-RTX card, so no ray tracing or anything like that to get us down or anything, because that would just kill the performance here. Oh, I'm getting hit by things here. So yeah, you can see here running through this part where the enemies spawn in, and there's a lot of things here going on. It does do pretty well, actually. It's pretty well. It's not going to be a locked 60. You could drop the settings to medium. You could try with some of the medium settings just to keep it there. But other than that, it's not too bad. You can see the odd little one frame dip here as we're traversing the open world, and these wolves fall out of the sky, which causes a bit of a frame rate drop. But other than that, it's reasonable. Again, the performance is okay. Right, so this is Halo Infinite then, multiplayer. I'm not doing the campaign because I can't be bothered installing it. The campaign is terrible. Anyway, so this is 1080p, high settings with bots. It's actually 4K native rendering resolution, because this is a WP app, a UWP app. Running on the Windows Store. It doesn't have exclusive full screen, and I was running this on a 4K screen, so it's output resolution of 4K but a rendering resolution of 1080p. using the dynamic resolution scaling and high settings. It runs okay. Playing with the bots because it's more of a test of the CPU. And again, 60 FPS is a reasonable setting here. We're getting destroyed, but I get punched in the face by a bot there. I actually got hit in the face by a bot. You can see here the settings that we're going for. Again, it does say 4K with a 50% resolution. In fact, it's medium settings. Sorry, medium settings there we were running. Let's go up to high then and just see what happens, because we had quite a lot of overhead at high settings. And yeah, high is reasonable. Bear in mind, the campaign and the multiplayer have different demands. The campaign is more CPU heavy. Did I get in I just got, what was that? Xbox rewards ad popping up in my face there. That blipped the frame rate a little bit. I forgot what the punch button was in the PC. Like, I forgot. I think it's F. I'm not sure. Maybe F or Q, maybe. I don't know. I didn't remember. I don't remember. It's been a while since I played Halo Infinite, but yeah, it's a Halo Infinite multiplayer. It should do okay. Bear in mind, if you're playing online, it will be less intensive on the CPU because we're running bots here, although multiplayer isn't that bad on the CPU. The bots actually push the system a little bit further. So 1080p high settings, you are going to have to lower that. There you go, smack someone down there. Take that, bot. I think I killed myself with my own grenade there. Yeah, this is not going well. I'm not playing this online. This really isn't going well, but this is a performance test, and yeah, it runs okay, I would say. Use Riva Tuner Statistics Server to get a better frame pacing. The frame time is a bit all over the place, really. So I would suggest that as a thingy. Yeah, I killed again there. So yeah, I would suggest you getting the odd little one frame dip below 60, but it is playable on the 1070. But I would say again, for the campaign, it's more CPU heavy because it is an open world campaign. I'm picking that up, whatever that is. I don't know what it is. I'm just gonna, yeah, there you go. Got an overshield now. See, suck my overshield. Yeah, take that, bot. There we go. So yeah, Halo Infinite is playable. Again, I don't care about the campaign, to be honest with you. That's why I'm not doing it. It was a 19 gig download, and I couldn't be bothered with it. So this is, again, it's not the Steam version we're running. So DX12, that's why the resolution is 50% reduced when you saw it in the menu there, because it is 4K that it's outputting, but it's rendering at 1080p. So it shouldn't really make any difference if you had a 1080p screen, because it is not exclusive full screen with DX12. You have to run at the native rendering resolution. Did I grapple myself into him and he just hit me there? But anyway, we'll move on to something else before we get any more embarrassed here. Right, so moving on then to Marvel's Spider-Man then. This is 1080p and medium to high settings. It's kind of a mixture of medium to high, swinging through the city, which is mostly CPU bound. You can see here we're not even GPU bound going through the city here. We're using FSR quality mode just so that we can get with a 60 FPS target. Doesn't always meet it though, because again, it's not the GPU that's at fault. It tends to be very CPU heavy. And although we do have a Ryzen 7 3700X, yeah, this one really hammers the CPU as well, more than it hammers the GPU, especially when you're swinging through the city. Although you will be GPU bound, sorry, when you are in when you're in a mission, especially if you're in a mission in a closed off area. But this is not too bad. The performance is pretty good. Again, it is mostly going to be GPU. We have put FSR on just to guarantee that we hit 60 FPS. It just will lower the resolution. So what you can do is you can do FSR with, you can put in the modes quality, quality balanced, ultra performance and ultra performance. Are the modes that you can select, or in Spider-Man you can set a frame rate target. In this case we've set it to 60 as the minimum frame rate, and we've just put FSR on, so if it drops below 60 it will drop the resolution. So this is 1080p. We've also got some 1440p because the 1080p is quite good. I mean, I would say go for 1440p. Is what I would recommend. We'll show you the 1440p footage, in fact. Okay, so this is the 1440p mode here that we're showing you here. And you can see here, it does dip quite a bit down into the 40s. This is native 1440p without any dynamic resolution scaling on. So we're giving you the native performance here. And even then, it is hitting GPU boundaries in the city. As well as it's going to be CPU heavy as well. But what we're going to do is show you the dynamic resolution scaling options that you've got here. Because Spider-Man is pretty good, actually, in terms of dynamic resolution scaling. So this is the settings, 1440p, as you can see. The upscale method, you can use FSR or IGTI, it's up to yourself. And again, you can set the dynamic resolution scaling target. So we've gone for a 60 FPS target. And the good thing about Spider-Man is it does let us do this in real time. And as you can see here, the frame rate is back up to 60 FPS. Dips into the 50s again, but that is mostly caused by the CPU rather than the GPU there. So I would actually recommend 1440p. Again, turn the pedestrian density and the traffic density. Those are the big settings to win back performance on the CPU side. You can see here it's in the 60s now, with some dips into the 50s. Native 1440p was dips into the 40s. So if you've got a VRR monitor, then I would say then if you're happy with that, then you could go with that at native resolution. But again, FSR, you can use IGTI, the Insomniac Games Temporal Injection. I think that's what it stands for. It's Insomniac's own scaling. It's up to you what one you want to use. The good thing about Spider-Man is it does support a number of these resolution, super resolution options, we'll call them, including, you know, you've got NVIDIA's DLSS, which can't be used on this card, which is a shame, and you've also got Intel's XESS as well, but you've got AMD's FSR and Insomniac's own, you know, Insomniac Games Temporal, and I think that's IGTI it's called. It's just one of their own little things. But you can see here, if we leave the city though, you can see the frame rate. If it's above 60, it's going to be native 1440p, basically. So you can see the frame rate is sitting there around the 60 FPS mark. It does go into the 70s when there's just nothing to render when you're sitting there. If you go up a building, for example, here, like, there's nothing really for the game to render. And the frame rate, there's not a lot for the game to render, and the frame rate does jump up above 60. So I would say 1440 with FSR or IGTI, whatever you want. Their performance is pretty much the same. You can see it's going up into the 70s. We can perch there as well. But anyway, let's go check out some more Sony games, because there's a lot of Sony games released in 2022. Right then, moving on to another Sony game. There's a lot of Sony games in 2022 for the PC. Technically a 2018 game, but this is God of War then. Native 4K. We're going to try and see if we can beat the PS4 Pro with a GTX 1070. So the PS4 Pro did checkerboarded 4K. This is full fat native 4K. At normal settings, we're going for the same settings as the PS4 Pro. And because the PS4 only targeted 30 FPS, we only have to hit 30 FPS. And it doesn't quite get there. We're doing this. This is the first, like, major boss that we do. And this is as far as I've ever gotten the PC version. I did finish it on the PS5. But as you can see, dips below 30. So it is comparable to the PS4. Comparable to the base PS4, because it never could stick to 30 FPS. So we're running the same settings. It's just the original settings, it's called. Medium settings. I got a hit there. I'm getting hit a lot here. So they say 30 FPS is 60. There's not a huge difference. I noticed the difference. Like, I'm getting hit a lot. I'm getting whacked a lot here because I'm just not doing a good job of dodging here. But so we're using the game's internal frame rate cap. We've gone again native 4K, no upscaling options here. 3840 by 2160, and yeah, it's just not good enough, really. There's dips down. 27 FPS is what it goes to. This part here, with where we see Atreus, boy, stabbing this dude after we kill him here. This is one of the hardest and most taxing parts of the test area that we've got here. So this part you can see here, yeah, see it's going down into the 20s, 27. It is only a cutscene, mind you. So if you could live with it, if you could live with it on the PS4, you could argue down to 25, getting that cinematic frame rate now. We're getting down 21 there, briefly. So you can see there when Atreus does that, native 4K is kind of out, although the GTX 1070, it was never a 4K card when it came out in 2016, so it's not really viable for native 4K, but once again, FSR is our friend here. Right, so this is the same sequence. Again, we've gone for 4K with FSR Quality mode now enabled, and we're still targeting 30 FPS, and so our native render resolution is 2560 by 1440, and as you can see there, it does get you the 30 FPS there. It doesn't dip below, because the FSR working well here, and yeah, it's pretty decent here. You can see here it sticks to that 30 FPS target. I think the PS4 Pro was what, 1800p. Usually it ran about that. That was its native rendering resolution. We can't target that because we have to use the FSR presets. So the quality preset is 1440p. But that's not bad. Performance is not bad. We're also running the high settings now, because there was so much overhead. So I did try the high setting. So we're running higher graphic settings than the PS4 Pro, and we're running at a lower resolution though, with FSR. So it's still a 4K output, but the game is just rendering at 1440p, and I think it's reasonable performance-wise. It's pretty. I think the performance here is pretty reasonable. Again, 30 FPS cap, not too bad. Can't quite get it. If you uncap the frame rate, it will get into the it goes to like the 40s, and not gonna get 60 FPS. But if you want, if you like graphics and you want graphic settings, then we'll show you the settings here right now. So you can see here we are running the high preset, not the original. Original is the PS4, and you can see here 1440p is the render resolution. We can push the target up to 60, and we'll drop the settings to original settings, and you can see here it's in the 40s. It's not good enough. Again, if you've got a VRR display, it might be good enough. It does dip below 40 though, in most FreeSync monitors and G-Sync monitors start at 40 FPS there. So again, we have to put a 60 FPS limit. FSR in balanced mode, we could try that as well, which lowers the rendering resolution. Again, it just doesn't quite get there, doesn't it? Not it's in the higher 40s now as opposed to the low 40s, but it's just not going to get there. I mean, there's nothing going on in this one. We don't want to lower the settings below original to low. Really, original is the PS4 Pro settings. We can go for performance mode, which is 1080p rendering resolution target, as you can see there. And again, it just doesn't quite get there, does it? And it looks, to me, it's starting to not look great now, with the FSR. We're scaling from 1080p to 4K now. It's just not quite there. So what we'll do is I'm going to hook this up to a 1080p monitor, and we'll go back and try native 1080p resolution. Okay, so this is native 1080p with again, high settings with a 60 FPS cap, and it just doesn't quite get there, does it? You can see here when there's now action on the screen now. We're fighting the same boss again. This is the benchmark boss that I'm doing. I'm calling this the benchmark boss. But yeah, it just doesn't quite get there. I know I had to update. I updated the GPU driver, which is why the GPU statistics aren't showing. But you can see the frame rate here, and again, it is mostly GPU bound, as it has been on the last few times we've tested this. But yeah, it just doesn't quite get there, does it? To 60. I mean, it would be fine if you have a VRR display. Then this would be fine. Again, just dips into the 50s. It'd be okay. You can do native 1080p, and it'd be okay. This part again is the worst part here. When again we get Atreus doing the stabbing. of the big dude here. Can't remember his name even though I've fought him 100 times. I still get hit by him though. And still, you still see Kratos' nipple there in 1080p. So you can see here dips down again right here as it zooms in as Atreus stabs away. It's not much of a dip, so playable, you could argue. It is definitely playable at 1080p and high settings. This is higher than the PS4 that we're running, and the higher frame rate as well than a base PS4. So that struggled to hit 30 FPS. So at least we've got that. We're never going to match the PS5 with the GTX 1070. But yeah, so it's okay. If you can put up with occasional dips, then it's not too bad. You can see it dropping down into the lower 50s now. So VRR display, it's okay if you've got VRR. But the next option we're going to try is the FSR Quality mode. Okay, so we're back once again. I got hit again by that boss. So this is again 1080p high settings with FSR Quality mode, so a rendering resolution of 720p. Is the internal rendering resolution there. And again, it's outputting at 1080p with the 720p. Native rendering with FSR 2.0, I think this is, not 2.1. But yeah, this is pretty decent. Again, this is how you get 60 FPS. There's nothing really we can do in between. It could probably render at a higher resolution, I'm thinking, because there may be enough GPU overhead there to get it at, say, 900p, but that is the setting the FSR quality mode is in. There's no ultra quality mode in this. But yeah, so we're back with 60 FPS. We'll kill this thing. Killing it quicker now. But yeah, you can see here that the frame rate stays rock solid. I would use, again, we're using the in-game frame rate cap, so the frame time is meh. If you want that 16.6 millisecond frame time, consistency, use Riva Tuner Statistics Server to cap the frame rate, or the NVIDIA control panel to cap the frame rate. You can do that, and it does work better than the in-game. We're just using the in-game one just because we're changing a lot of settings and moving around. But you can see here in this part here, again, it is a locked 60 FPS. It was in the 50s at native 1080p. But with FSR enabled, it is a nice 60 FPS there. The frame time is up and down. Still 16 milliseconds though, so you shouldn't notice it. As long as it's not swinging between like 15 and 17. You should notice it. But again, we know how to fix this by just going into Riva Tuner Statistics Server or the NVIDIA control panel and just setting the frame rate limit in there. Sets it at the driver level. God of War is different from the other Sony games that we've looked at because it is DX11 rather than DX12, so there's no like shader compilation or anything. Shader compilation stutters, although Spider-Man doesn't have that. It's well optimized. We will take a look at Uncharted because that's out now. You can see bit of artifacting when Kratos swings the axe, or when we move the camera around Kratos' head there. You can notice a bit of the reconstruction artifacts, but it shouldn't be too bad. You shouldn't really be noticing that in combat. You are getting a nice smooth 60 FPS update here, and again, it is pretty smooth. I did play this for about another half hour in this. I'm not going to show you all the footage because that's where we test it. I can't play it for half an hour each time. We just don't have the time to do that. But I did go and fight these enemies. The frame rate did dip at all the other tests that we did here. You can have 30 FPS and 1440p if you want. If you want high resolution, if you want a 4K with or 1440p rendering resolution with a 4K output. Should point out you can also do this at 4K with the 720p as well. The ultra performance setting you can go to if you want that there. And again, there's the frame time isn't even, but we could fix that easily again. So God of War is quite reasonable, runs quite well here with these settings on the GTX 1070. Once again, FSR is our best friend when it comes to the 1070. Okay, and speaking of shader compilation, let the shaders compile in Uncharted. I would recommend that. Depending on the CPU, can take a long time. You can see here it is massively using all the cores and all the threads and pushing that CPU temperature way up. But it is definitely worth it because you won't get the shader compilation stutter, which has plagued a lot of DX12 games that have been released recently. So it is nice that Uncharted does this before. Just let it build the shaders. Let it compile the shaders before you play. Right, so Uncharted 4 then at 1080p. It defaulted to ultra settings. That's what it defaulted to. But I wouldn't recommend it because, again, we're struggling to get 60 FPS. What I did was I turned the shadows and the reflections down to high. Because they're easy savings there. In terms of everything. Textures, we want ultra. We'll leave reflections at high. And as you can see, the frame rate is, nicely above 60. There are dips below 60 FPS, but they are usually kind of fleeting. You can go with the high preset as well. Go for the enhanced settings and the high preset. VRAM, we've got enough. 6 gigs it's using up. Again, the recommended GPU for this is a GTX 1060. But yeah, Uncharted on the PC is a reasonable port here. Again, so high preset, kind of. We're sort of ultra and high combination there. When it loads a new area, though, it does kind of stutter because there's no loading screen. So you will get a drop of below 60. There's nothing to render here, so that's how the frame rate. Nothing. There's not a lot to render. It's just geometry that it's rendered. Well, it doesn't render it. It's just texture that's rendered out here, and that's why the frame rate's sort of in the high 60s here. So this is pretty reasonable. Again, we are GPU bound on this PC, so we tried to keep it GPU bound, just so that we can, we can get this. Keep the GPU, keep the CPU out of it. But yeah, Uncharted is a reasonable PC port that it was done by Iron Galaxy, and again, 1080 is good enough. We didn't really try anything. You do have FSR available as well if you wanted to put FSR quality mode again, and it doesn't have a FPS target like Spider-Man. Unfortunately, Spider-Man was really good. Like, Spider-Man's probably the best of all the PlayStation ports that we've seen from PlayStation Studios. This was done by Iron Galaxy, this port. Spider-Man was done by Nixies. I don't know who did God of War. I don't know, I didn't say. But Nixies did Spider-Man. So it has all of the scaling options. This has DLSS as well, and FSR as its scaling options. Of course, we can't use DLSS on the GTX 1070. But FSR is quite nice, quite doable. So it was a struggle to find 2022 PC games. That was the problem. Most of them were Sony games, because we had God of War in January, we had Spider-Man in August, Uncharted was October. We've got Sackboy coming as well, and Spider-Man Miles Morales is coming in November as well. Sackboy came out just a few days ago as I was recording this. But you can see here as we go up here, this is where the frame rate kind of starts to dip. And when we go into the auction here. This is a good point because there's a lot of characters on screen, and there are a lot of high, especially the hair. The hair is really high quality here, and I think that's what really causes the GPU issues. So you can see here when we go up here, dips into the 50s. We could again drop the preset down to high. That would maybe prevent that, or enable FSR. Would be another option again to keep that out, because it is GPU bound. You can see 99% GPU usage. But Uncharted is a nice looking game. It is an older game, you could argue, but it's still a 2022 PC release. And I couldn't find many 2022 PC releases. We had a tight deadline that I'd set for this video, so this is the newest game, and I haven't had a chance to get very far into it to test it that much. This is just where I was when we started it. And you can see indoor areas run fine, but yeah, so I didn't really get a proper chance to do proper comparisons like we did with God of War, and that's the thing. I don't own what's it called again? Gotham Knights. That's a pretty poor game, but from what I've seen of the PC port, it's CPU bound, so it doesn't matter which GPU you have, so that's what kind of excluded it from this video. Let's see if Samuel can get over there. Nathan's bro. Yeah, he did. I made it. That's good. No, he's not dead. That's excellent. Excellent, he made it across there. But yeah, the GTX 1070 is still an excellent GPU in 2022. The good news about most games that release these days is a lot of them support FSR. So FSR is our friend. Again, unlike the RTX GPUs, which do support DLSS, they do age better. So if you had something like an RTX 2060 or something like that, you are giving up 2 gigs of VRAM to the 2070. You can see here in Uncharted, we're using more than the 6 gigs of VRAM, so you'd have to drop the texture quality down to high, I think, if you really wanted to get performance out of this. So yeah, having that 8 gigs, it does lack memory bandwidth now. It's only got GDDR5, and the lack of DLSS and the lack of ray tracing support. Although games like Uncharted doesn't have ray tracing, we should point out. But there are games in there like Spider-Man has ray tracing as well there. So we couldn't test anything that had ray tracing. There is technically, I mean, Crysis Remastered will do ray tracing, software ray tracing, but the performance isn't great from the GTX cards, so there's no point in doing them. But anyway, so yeah, the GTX 1070 is quite a cheap GPU these days. I did check prices. You can pick it up for about under £200 these days. Second hand, they don't sell it brand new. I should also point out as well, this is fully supported by NVIDIA. So it still runs on the latest driver. And again, it's still running the latest games. You're just having to compromise. When it launched, it was a 1440p card in 2016. But now we're kind of dropping down to 1080p. And it's still a viable option for 1080p. We do have to drop some of the settings. But once again, we've got, FSR as an excellent technology there, so that we can get these these games at higher frame rates, or we can get them to 60 FPS. So you can see there's still dips in the 50s, but other than that, it's okay. So whenever you enter a new area, it seems to be because it has to load in the next area, because we're going to go up here and we're going to go inside this building. So that's what's causing it. You see the FPS is back up. It was back into the 90s briefly. So I'm guessing that's what it is, because there's no loading screen. God of War does the same. Like, God of War doesn't have any loading screen once you initially load it up. You could play through it from start to finish without seeing another loading screen, provided you didn't, shut the game down. Uncharted, I think, is pretty similar to that as well. So it just kind of transitions to the next sequence fairly quickly. And I think that's what it does, because it puts load on the CPU. Obviously, the CPU has to get through that. So with with maybe a higher end CPU, you could argue it might be better, or a faster SSD. I should point out that all these games are running from a USB SSD externally. That way, if I test them on multiple systems, I don't have to keep reinstalling the game. So it is a Samsung T7 1 terabyte USB there, as we see Victor Sullivan. There he is. Handsome bugger that he is. So this is the part where the frame rate kind of dips into the 40s, but this part is really intensive. It's not really a gameplay part here. We'll show you this part where we go to the auction here, and the detail on the characters is incredible in Uncharted. It might have been 2016 game, Uncharted, but it's still an amazing looking game to this day, especially on the PC. Now there is a PS5 version out as well, which was really expensive, but you can see here, look at it dipping, but look at the look at the amount of people it's having to render here, if you consider that. And it's mostly cutscenes in this part. You can see now that it's rendered everything, it's gone back up to into the 70s. But as you walk down through the auction house, the level of detail on these people is pretty high. We could put FSR on as well. That would tidy it up if you wanted a lot 60 FPS here. But it's not too bad. Bear in mind the PS5 does maintain 60 FPS in these sequences. But again, the PS5's RDNA 2 GPU is better than a 1070. It is more powerful. It's more 2070 Super level of GPU in the PS5. We should point out that so it is a newer architecture as well, being RDNA 2. So that's why it kind of struggles. See, there's not a lot to render there. That's why it was in the 70s. It's just showing you the map, and then you're back to rendering all the detail there. And it is a nicely detailed game again, Uncharted 4. I haven't tried the Lost Legacy yet. Haven't tried that because you get both with them. So anyway, we'll wait until they go down there, and we'll show you the performance here. You've got like the transparency effects with the ice sculptures. That really, really hampers the GPU. That's what really hurts it. So we'll wait until we get down there, and then but yeah, the GTX 1070, I would recommend it as a mid-range GPU, as a mid-budget to mid-range GPU. Again, you can find these fairly cheap on eBay these days. The GPU prices have come down significantly. Beforehand, you were looking at like £500 for a GTX 1660 Ti in the UK, and you can see here, look, this is where the frame rate gets into the 40s, but again, there's a lot of people there. It is a very detailed environment with very detailed character models. The NPCs are very detailed as well there, and it's just when it's having to render a lot of that. You can see here going through here, it's fine because there's not a lot of NPCs here. You can see it back up into the 60s, into the 70s, but I think it's worth putting up with. I didn't get a chance to do a lot of action sequence testing because the game crashed a couple of times after this, and my time recording was running out. See, this is a big room here with a lot of people in it, and you can see frame rate struggling. Those ice sculptures that you see here, those are the transparency effects of them. That's what really hampers the GPU there. Look at that ice sculpture there. That dude's in the way, the waiter did there. Look at there's the a bigger one there. So that's what's hampering the frame rate here. Very GPU bound segment. Again, FSR would help smooth this out and get you to the 60 FPS. Look at that. So it's having to reflect and refract all the light through it as well. And that's really intensive there. Jeez, Victor. What the hell is he doing? Anyway, that is all for this video. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again soon. And goodbye.